Time to get your fix. Come on down, get your horrible gaming review. 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 Ow!
Hello, my name is Zachariah with Old Man Gaming, and this is another horrible game review. Before we get to it, just a few disclaimers. Number one, I do snap judgment reviews here, so the horrible in the title of this content does not refer to the game or DLC that I am reviewing, but more so the actual review itself. I do snap judgment reviews, which means I get about 5 to 10 hours with each one of these games, and I'm just trying to give you an idea if you're going to like it right off the bat. With that in mind, I don't give scored reviews for video games. I don't believe in them. I think video games is one of the most subjective forms of art. So therefore, you will get an overview of what the game is. Then I will tell you the pros and the cons of the game, in my opinion, as all reviews are. And then I'll tell you whether or not I personally will be sticking with this game outside the uses of this review. That being said, my review today is Torchlight 3. Just dropped a console into Games Pass, and this is the third installment in the Torchlight series. This game is an overhead dungeon crawl hack and slash, a la Diablo, and other sorts like it. It's a little bit more of a tongue-in-cheek version of that sort of game, but still, you will select the role of one of 4 customizable character classes. They each get a starting pet, a starting weapon, and some starting armor, and then you are immediately thrown into the fray. You will liberate a city, and then go upon to each different area, questing, just constantly slogging through mobs and mobs of monsters to find dungeons, which you slog through more monsters and monsters. Most of this is with the point of getting more loot to upgrade your character, more experience to give your character skill points, and so on and so forth. Now, Torchlight 3 differs from the other Torchlight games in the fact that it has added this interesting home mechanic where you actually get a fort very early on in the game, which you can actually build things, you can customize stuff, and it's not even just all decoration or cosmetic. You can actually build a place to use dyes to change the look and appearance of armor sets that you like. You can you can also build these certain things where if you feed them, like there's a luck tree where if you feed it your imbued weapons and armor, it actually grows and gives you more lucky chance to getting bigger and better armor out there. There are also plenty of other effects of different things that you can plant, and you collect things to feed them to make it bigger and to generally grant you a bigger buff. I didn't get as much time with this game as I usually like to get. I did get the 5 hours, but just barely. So I only actually got to play 3 of the 4 character classes, and the last one I got to play for a very small period of time. One interesting thing about these character classes is, in addition to having a different skill set and different skill trees, you can actually, each one of them has kind of a different mechanic that changes the way the character class works. Now, this could have been in Torchlight 2. I don't remember it. Torchlight 1 was very run-of-the-mill hack-and-slash sort of thing. So, like, they all had different abilities and stuff, but they didn't have any core mechanics that were different. And what I mean by core mechanics, like, yes, you can put in to get new abilities, and all the abilities are different from, say, the Rail Worker to the Dusk Mage, but the interesting thing is the Rail Worker has this thing where if you build enough track pieces, you actually get huge buff to endurance, health, and damage, whereas the alchemist, well, he's not the alchemist in this, I think he's actually called the Dusk Mage. You actually have to equip both light and dark spells, and if you and as you use them, you will actually gain bars on either side, and you're trying to gain enough in both to then enter this kind of like Super Saiyan Goku sort of mage form. Stuff like that kind of added to the combat in what is usually a kind of a monotonous slog. One of my biggest problems with Torchlight 2 is I felt it got boring fast. It was just kind of like a hold down a button and kill everything, move to the next place, hold down a button, kill everything. And I know that appeals to a lot of people. It just didn't appeal to me. What's weird is I loved Torchlight 1. Absolutely loved it when I first played it. I think maybe my tastes have changed a little bit as the years have gone on. And while Torchlight 2 just kind of appeared to be more of the same, this actually does do some interesting things. The fort thing, as I said, is really interesting, as well as the core mechanic change between character classes. It really helped to make the character classes feel different on a base level instead of just a different set of skills. They've also added this relic system, which is basically a lot of people talk this up. I kind of felt like it was basically just another set of skills that you put into. There's not really a whole lot of difference to it. You can spend your skill points on that or your normal stuff. So I didn't really see why that was so amazing, but nonetheless, it is nice to have a customizable set of skills as one of your set of skills instead of just something you purchase. That's really the overview. There's not a whole lot else to this game. I mean, it's your simple formula. Go to an area, kill as many monsters as you can, loot the stuff, move on to higher areas, level up, repeat. That's really the goal of this, with some sprinkled in base building and some other things that kind of make it feel like, oh, there's a little bit more point to this other than just perpetual character growth. So let's get into the pros and cons. Pros. I like to start positive as usual. I'm going to go with my first pro on this is the fort building. I know that there's one thing about this genre that I think we need more of, and that is innovation. Like, the core mechanic of it is fine and was great when we were playing it 10 years, 15 years ago, but now we've come to a point where I want a little bit more meat to it. The core mechanic of just killing mobs is fine. I mean, look at Borderlands. I love Borderlands, and really that's just the first-person equivalent of a hack-and-slash mob-kill dungeon crawler. Like, that's basically what it is. But there's some more nuance to it, and I think that's what games like this kind of need, is some more interesting nuance. And nuance number one for this is the fort building. I like that they experimented with this. I also like that I can gather materials out in the field. I'm not just looking to kill all the monsters. I'm also looking for trees to chop down so that I can build stuff back at the fort, or boulders to mine. Stuff like that is nice. It gives me a goal other than just perpetual power gain, which I've got to say, I'm getting a little sick of in games. I know. I'm a big games as service guy, and I'm a big person with the looter shooters and everything, but I want just a little bit more now. I want a little bit more motivation as to why I'm doing the stuff I'm doing. And I can come up with that motivation, but to do that, you need to give me options. This game at least tries to give you a new option, which is the fort building. My second biggest pro is the build system in this game. Okay, now, I've played a lot of games with builds, and I'm not the build master general like Philbilly330 is. Nonetheless, I know my builds. I can make a decent build, a serviceable build, on my own. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to run some crazy dungeon in 10 seconds or less, but still, I can do the math and I can do it well. However, most builds in games, and one of the things that I don't like about build systems, is you really don't start seeing the true perks of a build until real late in the build. For example, Borderlands. When you start popping skill points into those trees, you're popping things for like 2% armor regeneration, 5% damage buff. You're not seeing the big picture until you start to get some of those skills maxed out and they start working in concert with each other, and then it really starts to become explosive. So you really have to get up to like level 20 or so before your build is really like, oh wow, I can see the effects of this. Not in Torchlight 3, and I think this is the first game ever with a build system that I've seen such an immediate result in the build system. For example, my first character, and the character I played the most, I played the sharpshooter. He was a shooter. Just like a long-range shooter character. One of the first weapons you get is a weapon that inflicts poison. I had selected the poison relic, which gave you some extra poison skills on it. One of the poison skills, right off the bat, is a poison spider. That's the one you get with the relic. It's like a spectral thing that gets summoned. Well, There's another skill thing right next to it that if you put into it, it has a 10% chance that when you strike an enemy that is poisoned, that enemy will then, that in place of that enemy, another smaller miniature poison spider will spawn. So what I did is I attached the venomous revolver. I then added another trinket thing to it to increase the poison chance of that. I put an ability in one of the other spots that increased my chance of poison. It was this like bowling ball spell thing that you roll it into a mob and it just poisons everything. And then basically at level 7, I could make it so that I would hit the enemies, I could drop 2 of my big poison spiders out, I could shoot the enemies, I could throw one of these bowling balls down, and every time I shot an enemy, another little poison spider would spawn. And I had this immediate swarm poison spiders, spectral poison spider swarm build. And that's only at level 7. And I know what you're thinking. This broke the game. It didn't. It didn't at all. It was still very challenging. I was still having a hard time moving through, and I was playing on normal. But it was still an instant gratification that the build idea that I had was working, and that I could see it on the screen. I could see the effects happening. I've never played a game like that. I've never played a game where the build is immediate. You're already seeing the effects of your build right off the bat. Instead of waiting until all the points fall into place, I can immediately see what my build's going to look like at the end, and I can immediately see the effect of just smart building. I really enjoyed that. Alright, so let's switch over to the cons. I mean, everything else in the game is basically serviceable. I'm not going to list them in pros because they're just decent. That's not a reason to specifically point them out. However, there are some cons that I directly need to point out. Number 1, there is still a monotony to it. Now, yes, they did add some base mechanics to it, but some of the base mechanics are very basic and don't really give you that special thing that you're looking for. Whereas I found it was sad that I played the Dusk Mage last and only got to play him for about 40 minutes because I found his little mechanic to be the most interesting to balance my side mana as well as whether I'm using too many dark or light spells. I thought that was amazing, an amazing balance, and an amazing way to make me think about how I'm using my spells and stuff in combat. Whereas the engineer was just use your power until you have used it enough and then get more power. That's a little irritating. I liked the thought behind the new mechanics, but I didn't necessarily like all of the implementations of it. And because of that, some of the characters fall right back into the old patterns of just this monotonous slog through bad guys combat-wise. And very little strategy to it. And that just bothers me. Don't get me wrong. I think this game is for some people, and I don't hate this game. But at the same time, I want there to be a little bit more to it. I need to be able to think about it. I don't mind the mob slogs. It's just I need there to be a strategy to the mob slogs instead of just I press a button, I heal when I'm low, and hopefully I survive. The builds went a long way to helping that, but again, there is still just this small monotony to it that I just can't get past. My next con is a technical con. One thing that's a little bit irritating about this game is it gives you kind of this diagonal side down view, which most of the games have. They're not straight top down, but they're not third person. But you really can't move the camera anyway. It's a set camera. That gets really annoying, especially when scenery blocks your path. Yes, they do outline you, and they outline the bad guys so you can see them, but it's not fun to have this like huge mob battle, and you can't actually see anything but like outline shadows through scenery. So that was a little frustrating. I wish they could have found a way to rotate the camera in some way so that we could actually control that. And finally, my last con, I debated whether or not to mention this, but I feel like I kind of have to. And this might be a little nitpicky, it might be a little overcritical, but like I said, I really thought about whether I was going to say it or not, but I do. And I think they just don't do enough. Don't get me wrong. I really like the addition of the fort system. I like the try with the new mechanics on the characters. But there's just so much, especially nowadays, that you could add to a game like this very easily to make it more interesting. Heck, Hades, and yes, I know Hades is a roguelite, but in a lot of ways, it's a dungeon crawler much like this one, and compares combatly to this in a lot of ways. However, Hades, there's no monotony. Yes, I know you would argue that it's because the rooms change every time, but even in the combat, one of the things that they do so well in Hades is the personal stuff. Every time you die, it's almost as rewarding as getting through the dungeon because you end up back in that social hub, and the conversations with the other characters are so good. So good, in fact, that you can actually romance some of them and build relationships with them. I know sometimes I sound like a broken record on the romance simulations in games, and a lot of people aren't interested in that. And that's fair. I'm just giving you an example of a thing they could add to this game very easily that would just put more meat on the bone. Give me more motivation for these slogs. Give me more reason to be out there grinding. Grinding isn't content. Grinding is to get more content. And that's what I kind of want from this game. I want some more additions. I want some more systems added to it. And like I said, I think the fort thing was a really cool idea. I just don't think it's quite enough. And I'm hoping that I don't know that this game did that great, but I'm hoping that this game is successful enough for them to make a fourth one, and they really swing for the fences with that. Because I think they're on the cusp of making this genre very interesting and really revitalizing it in a lot of ways, because really, other than Diablo, I can't think of a ton of games that are like this. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty. Don't at me. But still, I feel like this could be a really interesting innovation that they kind of dabbled in, whereas I would have much rather just seen them swing. So anyway, that brings us to whether or not I'm going to stick with it. I might play it a couple more times. I have a lot of I don't have a lot of games right now playing. There's not a lot of AAA stuff coming out right now. I've got a backlog of games that I'm just playing around with, and this might be one of them. But I do want to say, a little irritating, you can't get it on Games Pass for PC. You can only get it on Games Pass for console, so that might keep me from playing as much as I normally would. So, alright, well, that's my review. I hope this helped you guys in some way, shape, or form. As usual, you can check out everything the channel has to offer. You can contact us on Facebook at OManGamingDH, on Twitter at OManGaming9. You can join our Discord. The link is in the description below. You can influence this and all of our shows from there. And as long as you guys keep watching and listening, we'll keep making them. We'll see you guys next week.